the corner of Miller Street are now asking why haven't these stops been built, as they are a far safer option for the children. These stops should have been done several years ago and could have been done by this Christmas, but now again we wait. The discussion of a bike track is and should be kept separate issue to the super stop. The construction design of the super stop will not change because of a painted bike track. Estimates given so far to me indicate that already over $500,000 has been spent on negotiations and plan changes for the stops, and now in excess of another $500,000 to get the work teams out again to come back out to Nicholson Street to begin the work again, because they were planned to carry on from the work getting done further down Nicholson Street.
Brian, we normally have 2 minutes, but I'll give you another minute or so, okay?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Councillor Martin, as a Greens member...
Just try and direct it through the chair, please. Please. Thank you, Brian. Good on you.
So, as a Greens member, the Greens are supporting the super stops right across the network. And yet here in Moreland, we find that it's Greens councillors that are the main problem.
Okay.
Right?
And take that as a comment.
And the... because the bike track is supported, the bike track is supported by no other party, and yet here we're finding that the bicycle users are seen as a priority over other persons. Access to public transport, which is a human right. People such as myself and other people that need the use of the low-floor trams. My question to council is, considering that it seems the only jurisdiction that council can have input on this issue is the car parking, and that anything else to do with the super stop like design or curbs is neither a council or PTV issue but a Vic Roads issue. Okay. Therefore, how much more of your ratepayers and taxpayers' money is going to be wasted on whether or not a bike track can be painted on these super stops? What council has in its hand tonight is to be able to bring this to a close, to end this political wrestle that is a no-win wrestle. The object here is to build the super stops ASAP and the paintwork to be decided later.
Okay.
I look forward to seeing a positive result, and thank you for your time.
No, thank you for your time, Brian. Thanks for the question. I will go to Councillor Martin.
Thanks. I'm happy to respond, and thanks for coming tonight, Brian. I do appreciate your question. I completely understand your frustration in this matter, and I don't accept that it is a Greens problem. I think if you look at the previous meeting, I mean, the Greens on council here, we aren't in majority. So it does require other councillors who are not solely Greens councillors for any motion to pass at this council. I think the main issue for us is the safety of cyclists. And yes, cyclists don't ride down there at the moment. That's because it is unsafe. And what we're wanting to do is future-proof these stops for our city. And in the report tonight, what you can read and what you'll see is that the issue is the curvature at the entrance where the ramp starts. And what happens is, under the previous designs, they pushed cyclists in with vehicles. So if there was a cyclist on the road, yes, not many cyclists use it, but if there was, it would push them together. What these modified designs that we're recommending tonight, or what officers have put forward for us, is alleviating that problem. So we're actually putting forward 2 designs tonight and 2 proposals that we want PTV to engage in discussion with us. The first being the ideal situation that it has a bike lane, has a reduction in speed limit, and has a reduction in the road width. The second option, which is a fallback option, and that is if PTV want to continue against us in not wanting to make it safe for cyclists, and that is doing the modifications to make it safe at that entry point into that ramp, but not painting the bike lane on there. And that's what's written in the report tonight, and I'm also going to move a few other points in there just to reiterate our commitment to actually seeing this roll out. And Moreland Council, we have been actively campaigning for these for the last 5 years, and it's not just the council that's been dragging our feet. We've delayed this report by 2 months. We've been advocating for this for the last 5 years. So the buck doesn't stop with us. There are other parties at play, and We just want to see these things roll out, and we want to get the designs right so we don't have to go back in 5 years' time and dig them all up and do it again.
Thank you, Councillor
Am I
Martin.
allowed to reply to that?
No, we're going to leave it there, Brian. I'm sorry. All right, but thank you you've asked a question extremely well and been answered. All right, well, councillors, that actually concludes question time tonight. Just before we do, I'd like something to be noted in the minutes, and I'll read that. At the council meeting on the 8th of August 2018, in response to a question about the proposed changes to Nicholson Street Tram, I responded that whilst the council was aware of the concerns of Our Lady of Help the Christians Primary School, I was also aware that the school generally supported the proposal. I have since been informed by email of the principal of the school, Mr Philip Keisha, that I received on September the 14th, that this was in fact an incorrect statement by me and the school is opposed to the proposal. I request that that be noted in tonight's minutes. I promised the principal that I would read out such a thing and ask for it to be requested. Is that okay to request that? Councillor Bolton, we're just going back to leave of absence. Myself and Councillor Yildiz asking for a leave of absence. Are you calling for one? No, you're not. Okay, so just to remind that both myself and Councillor Yildiz are asking from October the 30th to the 5th of December 2018. Could I have a mover to accept that leave of absence? Moved by Councillor Davidson and seconded by Councillor Tapanos. Can I put that to the vote? All those in favour? Against? Declare that carried. Thank you, councillors. Now we move on now to reports. And the first report that we are dealing with tonight is DED 6118, Cooling the Upfield Corridor Action Plan for Adoption. And Councillor Dorney is on her feet. Are you moving the officer recommendation, Councillor Dorney?
Yes, I would like to move the officer rec.
Moving the officer recommendation. Moved by Councillor Dorney. Do I have a seconder for the officer recommendation? Councillor Abood. You may speak to it, Councillor Dorney.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd just like to, briefly, I think this is a great strategy. It is a piece of work that through the Urban Heat Island strategy is a corridor that has been identified as highly vulnerable to the Urban Heat Island effect. That corridor includes north of Park Street, over to the east to Barrow, up to Moreland Road, and then on the west along the Upfield railway line. It's a strategy which is outlining up until year 2029. So there's a raft of strategies, around 11 of which are actually funded, and then a range of others which we're looking at having in there in case the opportunity arises, through external funding or something from other stakeholders comes up. It is, we're seeing temperature increases of 52 degrees plus along Sydney Road with Urban Heat Island, with all the concrete and the mass that we have. That's only going to continue to rise as the impacts of global warming are felt. We really need to make sure we're not only mitigating what we can through increasing tree canopy and making our streets as habitable and as enjoyable and livable as possible for people to shop and enjoy. We also need to be mitigating adapting to the effects that we have through, there's a range of strategies such as looking at misting and water play opportunities, which is something that, although not saying yes or no to, it's just the opportunity to actually look at investigating into those opportunities, which is something that doesn't exist. There are a couple of examples in Brunswick, but overall it's more of an international example. Is there something
wrong?
96 and 4.
Yeah, but thank you.
Sorry. Yeah, so there's a range from increasing tree canopy in the public-private realm, looking at more innovative ways of how we actually interact with our streetscapes, and looking at adaptation as well as mitigation. So I think the work of officers has been really detailed, really well researched. The feedback from community has been really supportive. The engagement levels were really high with this strategy, and I look forward to its implementation.
Okay, did the seconder like to speak to it?
No.
Okay. Any other speakers either for or against?
I'd
amendment?
like to move an amendment. if
Yes,
I may.
please, councillor.
Just waiting for it to get up on the screen.
Yep, for sure.
There it is. The wording of the amendment is to remove action 6.7, water play and misting opportunities. It's in regards to conserving one of the precious
Okay, I'll
resources.
let you speak to it when we get. I'll just
Sure.
get a sec. Sorry, do I have is that acceptable to the mover and seconder? No. Okay. I'll see if I can get a second to that, and then I'll get you to talk now. Do we have anyone second? You're happy to second, Councillor Tafros? Now you may speak to it, Councillor Farnley.
Yeah, thank you. I concur with what Councillor Dorney said. It's a very good report. Essentially, the strategy brings together a lot of the good work that the council's doing. Earlier in our council term, Councillor Martin moved a strategy on increasing the amount of trees in our municipality and incorporate some of that work. The strategy focuses on increasing street canopy along the outfield, the Sydney Road, Central Road in Moreland. One of the things that I thought it just gets a little bit wrong is in regards to a precious resource, which is water. It looks at opening up water misting opportunities and I'm not sure, water play activities for kids or spraying residents on hot days on Sydney Road. Look, I've grown up in an era of water restrictions, the 5-minute shower, conserving as much water as you can. I don't think utilising water in this way is an appropriate way to utilise a precious resource. So we have to really seriously think about what the purpose of this report is, and the purpose is, as it should be, reducing the urban heat island effect, and street canopy goes a long way to addressing that. The concern I have is that we've just come out of one of the worst droughts we've seen on record. In fact, it's only going to get worse. And if we have any clean water available, that should be focused on the trees rather than misting residents along Sydney Road. So this is just about tightening this report up and making sure that we conserve a precious resource in water.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Takanos, as a seconder, would you like to speak to it?
Briefly, I do think that some of the proposals and some of the actions do need to be being thought out, and also I'm concerned about where some of these locations may be along those corridors. I know that we've invested a lot of money in the Brunswick Baths recently, and that's got some great water play facilities. So I think that is the appropriate place to have these type of water play features. I just don't think on the middle of a public road and in and around it would be the best place to place them. I do want to see some more work done maybe on cooling and misting and encouraging that. But I think that there is a lot in this strategy which is probably, in my view, not required at this point in time, and we need to give it some better thought about whether a public place, Sydney Road, is the best area for these, as opposed to a purpose-built facility like the Brunswick Baths. So I'm supportive of this amendment at the moment, but I do want to see more work done on it in the future.
Okay. Are there any speakers against the amendment? Yes?
I'd like to speak against the amendment. I would assume that council wouldn't consider just willy-nilly spraying water around the streets. I'd certainly understand Councillor Farnley's concerns about drought and water restrictions. I grew up in the midst of big drought, in a very many years long drought in Western Queensland, and then the long drought we had in Victoria, which is beginning again. So I certainly, and what we have seen is that energy efficiency, water efficiency saving measures by ordinary consumers haven't necessarily been mirrored by big business. So, you know, while we're all busy saving water, big business has been squandering water. But I think in situations of extreme heat, such as when it's over 40 degrees for several days, I think it is useful to have the option of this. Obviously, there'd have to be consideration made in terms of water catchments and all the rest of it as to when such a measure as misting and spraying of water is used. But in situations of extreme heat, when we have so many vulnerable people die as a result of heat waves, I think this is an option that we have to have. When a heat wave goes for longer than a day, then it means people do have to go about their daily business, even if they're, in a very vulnerable health situation. People have to go and buy food and go to medical appointments and so forth. So you can't necessarily just say stay at home or go to a cool place. Not everyone has the money to go to the cinema or a pub or wherever it might be cool. So I think we should keep this option in the report, and I would assume it wouldn't be used as a way of squandering water.
Okay, thank you. Any speakers, any further speakers in favour of the amendment? If there's no further speakers in favour, I think we might put the amendment to the vote, and then we'll deal with the other motion. So just to explain that we're voting on the amendment. So this is on the amendment that was put by Councillor Farnley and seconded by Councillor Tapanos. All those in favour of the amendment? All those against? Right, the amendment is lost, and so we move back to the substantive motion that was moved by Councillor Dorney and seconded by Councillor Abood. Are there any other speakers who haven't spoken yet on the substantive motion? Councillor Abood.
Thank you, Mayor. Before I start, I'd just like to acknowledge publicly that this is the last meeting that we'll be having where the current Mayor will be chairing on our behalf, and so I'd like to say thank you for the last year. It's been a pleasure to be your deputy.
Thank you very much.
With regard to the motion and the officer's recommendation as they stand, this is going out for consultation. The urban heat island effect work, cooling the upfield corridor is about creating place. It's about cooling this space so that people can hang out there. So it's very involved. It's to do with providing shade, providing options for cooling, making the streetscape more vibrant. We've got some big challenges ahead, and the most obvious one is the fact that at this stage we can't plant trees up and down Sydney Road as much as we'd like to because of the kind of infrastructure that is involved with such an important road. But in terms of the water stuff, I think that there is opportunities for us to be able to tap into some other commitments we've made, and some of that plays out in other reports through this today's agenda, just about ensuring that the area that we're providing for the community is safe and comfortable for people to be in, so that people are not isolated in their homes. So I really commend the complexity and the detail in this report and the piece of work, and look forward to it coming back and being signed off eventually. I'm happy to support this.
Are there any speakers against the substantive motion? Being no speakers against, and we haven't had a speaker actually against the motion, only one put amendment, we're going to put this to the vote. So all those in favour? Against? Declare that carried. Now we will move, and I had already intended to do, we will move across. Oh, division? I'm sorry, I didn't hear that. All right, go to those who voted in favour of the substantive motion, please stand. Please raise your hand. Clear? And against? Okay, thank you. All right, we're going to move to DCI, which is not the next one on the agenda, but DCI 3918 Yarra Trams Route 96 Tram Improvement Project, Nicholson Street, Brunswick East. In fairness to Brian, who's made it. Right, Councillor Mark was on his feet.
Thank you. So I would like to move a slight amendment to the officer recommendation, and if that's able to be put up, I can ask for a seconder.
Yeah, would you mind, when it's up, would you mind reading the amendment?
Yeah, so I'll start reading the amendment. So the first section is, so we're moving 1 to 4, that this becomes 3 to 6. What we're going to do is add in a first dot point, which says that Council notes Moreland City Council's long-term and ongoing advocacy and commitment to pursuing the complete rollout of fully accessible tram stops across the city as soon as possible. Add a second dot point that says notes Moreland City Council's desire for safe integrated transport options across our city that provide priority access for pedestrians, public and active transport users. So then the 1 to 4 becomes 3 to 6, adding in the words fully accessible tram stop into point 3, so it's a little bit more coherent, and adding a 7th point, which is that we write to the state government, Public Transport Victoria and Yarra Trams, emphasising our desire for all stops to be made fully accessible in our city, and ask that at least 30%, which is approximately an additional 20 stops of all tram stops in our city, are made fully accessible by the year 2020. The letter should also extend a welcome to the relevant agencies to meet with councillors and express our willingness to hold special council meetings should designs need to be promptly approved between our regular meeting process. So if I have a seconder, I'm happy to talk.
So do we have a seconder to that amended motion? Councillor Riley. So moved by Councillor Martin, seconded by Councillor Riley. You're welcome to speak to it now, Councillor Martin.
Fantastic, thank you. And thanks again for Brian for making the effort to come tonight. What I really wanted to do, and it has been a really interesting experience over the last couple of weeks in some of the reporting that has gone on, and really incomplete reporting on what was actually debated on in the chamber. I think it's really important to note that Moreland City Council and councillors in this room are fully supportive and have always been fully supportive of seeing these stops roll out, and to pitch it as we prefer bikes to super stops or to fully accessible stops is just really quite a ludicrous sort of accusation. It really is the fact that, you know, as a council, we have to make decisions where we want to get integrated outcomes. We don't operate in silos, and we want to make the best of every opportunity. And it shouldn't be a zero-sum game where one user group loses out at the opportunity when we have it to make the best of the designs. You know, we asked twice to have these designs reworked. They said it wasn't possible, but here we have 2 options before us brought from our officers that they believe are workable. And so what we're talking about here tonight is actually having a 1 metre bike lane with a reduction in the traffic lane. We're talking about a smoothing of the bluestone and making it wider so that there isn't a pinch for cyclists and cars, and also a reduction in speed limit to make that safer again. That's the preferred outcome as listed in this report. What there is, you know, we've written to PTV, we haven't received a response yet, and it is something that we are really wanting to work with PTV to avoid the VCAT process, because we're at a point now where we don't need to be playing politics, we just need to get these delivered. I note that there's about just over 10,000 residents in Moreland are listed at the last census as needing help in their day-to-day lives due to disability. And I think for that section of our community, as well as for pensioners and for parents with prams, this is incredibly frustrating. You know, we were promised 90% accessible stops across the entire state by last year. To date, on this council, all we have been given are 4 designs. So that's 4 designs out of 65 in this city. What we're doing here tonight is reconfirming our commitment to deliver these stops in the city, and to really encourage the government agencies to work with us to stop playing politics and to actually deliver these stops.
Thank you, Councillor. The seconder, Councillor Riley, would you like to speak to it?
Yes, thank you. Yes, thank you for the work that Councillor Martin's led on this, and to the officers for their work. I just want to acknowledge that I was the person who instigated the delay on this, and I was happy to do so because of the investment that's being put into this, and because it's a once in 100-year opportunity to get it right. I had assumed, and I was even talking to officers, that we had actually done some better work, but it turned out that some of the eyes on this issue, I don't think had been cast on it as close as they they should have been. I actually think Bicycle Network Victoria has let us down somewhat. I assume they would have been looking much more closely at this because it was meant to be a principal bike network if you look at the state maps. And some of that is actually quite confusing because what does that mean? Diddly squat. And you can see how much some of the confusion occurs in the community because governments commit to doing something, and what do we get? We get very little. We get delays, and then when we find out that we've actually haven't got it quite right and we delay it by a few months, we end up getting into trouble about it. But I'm prepared to wear that, not because I want to inconvenience people or delay it any further, but I just want to make sure that we get this as right as possible. So in finishing, I just want to say that we started this work in 2012, and it's been a long project to get it to this point, and I appreciate the effort and the work that councils and officers have particularly put in, and previous councils to this administration. So unfortunately, sometimes the eye on the ball, if you like, gets lost a bit during those lengthy considerations, and I think we need, as a council, to think about how we do that better. Tonight we're looking at our public engagement and community participation policy, and I hope that will help us to get some of this better. I actually look forward to us working more closely with government agencies and the likes of Bicycle Network Victoria, and I think that additional amendment tonight will actually help open those discussions up to ensure that we do that. I have to say, on the plus side, they did a lot of good work around the east-west connections for bike users and pedestrians. And I was actually speaking in favour of that in July. But unfortunately, the north-south connections are woeful, and I think that the solutions that have been put up tonight are really worth considering and working towards. And I just would like to invite all Morelanders to make sure we can do this, not just for now, but also for the future users of that road, those roads. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. Do I have any speakers against the motion? Yes, Councillor Tapanos.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm rising to, I guess, speak against the motion, but more importantly, to propose an alternative or an amendment, if it's accepted. The amendment would be to delete everything and replace it with 2 dot points. Dot point 1, that council inform VCAT that it withdraws its objection to the Public Transport Victoria proposal for accessible stops on the 96 tram on Nicholson Street in Brunswick, and 2, authorise the Chief Executive Officer to finalise any minor design changes required to implement council's decision in accordance with officer recommendations of August 2018.
Okay,
so see if that's acceptable. I don't
hang
know.
on, I'm pretty. Well, I'll ask. Is it acceptable?
Counterposed motion.
Sorry.
No, it's a counterposed motion.
Yeah, that's right. So it's not acceptable, obviously. Now, do we have a seconder to Councillor Tapanos's motion? Right. Okay. All right. You may speak to it because you have a seconder, Councillor Carly Hammond.
Thank you, councillors, Mr. Mayor. I do think we got this one wrong. I do understand that we need to
Sorry. I'm sorry. Just 1 second, Councillor.
Foreshadowed motion, so normally.
Because it's so different to the. Yes.
so normally
Okay.
you.
I'll just take some advice. I think that's a. Yeah.
Sorry, members, but
Right,
through the
sorry,
mayor, that's
yeah.
correct. So just through the mayor, we were just confirming
Very-
on
is
that.
it foreshadowed?
So it is substantially different.
Fine,
it's
so
not a-
therefore, it's not.
Yeah.
Okay, so what we'll take it
Take it as
up.
foreshadowed.
We're going to take it as a foreshadow, so I'll allow you to speak against the original motion if you want, but I won't allow you to talk to your motion at the moment because it's only a foreshadowed motion at this point.
Sure.
Okay? So you can speak against the motion that Councillor...
Sure, but I can speak to my foreshadowed.
during that debate, yes, you can.
Yeah, because I mean, okay. Well, I'll speak nonetheless because it may be supported anyway if this is not successful. In my view, that's why I thought it would be best as an amendment. But nonetheless, look, I do think, councillors, we got this wrong last time. I do know that we need to encourage cycling in our city, and we do. We need to invest in cycling infrastructure, and we do. There is infrastructure, the John Street shimmy, 100 metres away. I guess what I'm trying to say is that there are cyclists who need support to make cycling safer in our city, and we provide that support. But cyclists in this case have options, and there are many others in our community who just don't. And therefore we need to put that at the top of the priority and not delay any further, and actually just say to VCAT, we are withdrawing this. We're withdrawing it, and we want you to proceed with the accessible stops on the 96 on Nicholson Street. I think you've got to look at it not as two goods clashing, not as two public goods clashing, but what is of a greater importance, and what is it that is going to really change lives in our city. What decision is it tonight that is going to make life a lot easier for someone? So I do think, I know that there is a lot of passion in this issue in the community, and that's correct because it affects so many people. It's about quality of life, it's about accessibility. And I think we were wrong then, I think we're wrong now, and we should, quite frankly, I'm almost embarrassed that we ended up at VCAT on such an important issue that we've advocated for so many years, that we are in a fight with PTV around implementing super stops. We should be encouraging them, we should be supporting them, and we should be withdrawing our objection to their proposal. And as was mentioned in the gallery, any minor changes that we do need to make that could be made to improve cycling, we could do that anytime. We could do that after implementation of the stops, after implementation of the super stops. At the moment, what we really need to do is get the ball moving on these. And I was in the gallery at the Candidates Forum in Brunswick not long ago, and I noticed the former councillor, former mayor here, the leader of the Greens, Samantha Ratnam, talked about how important this issue was. So I would say take lead from her and withdraw this objection, let the super stops be built, and any other things we can do in and around this area to make life easier for cyclists, well, we can have a look at that and we can implement that. Some of those will be PTV, some of those will be council. Let's focus on that separately. Let's not delay any further. This is a critical piece of infrastructure that is so important and change lives, and I'm quite ashamed that it's been delayed for so long.
Can the motion be put, please?
Well, you can move that the motion be put.
Yep.
Okay, you haven't spoken a motion.
No.
I need a seconder for that, yes. Do I have a seconder for the motion to be put? Seconded by Councillor Dorney. So this, I'm putting forward the motion of Councillor Abood and seconded by Councillor Dorney, simply that the motion be put. All those in favour of the motion being put? All those against? Okay, I declare that lost. Who would like to speak in favour of the motion? This is the original motion.
The original motion, Councillor Martin's motion. I think when you do a job, you have to do it properly. When the very first super stops were put in the CBD, there was no proper consultation with emergency services, so they were put in such a way so that fire trucks couldn't go down the streets. So they had to do a major modification to those super stops. I actually think I don't think people should be pitted against each other. I don't see why we can't do both at the same time. Make accessible stops and make it safe for cyclists to go through those stops. I think once they're built, it's harder to change. And there'll be resistance to change. And I think when you see stopgap measures that are done, then they tend to become permanent, like the single track at the end of the upfield line. And so you end up with something which is really inconvenient. And we know that cycling is increasing in our city, both because of people trying to get fit and conscious, taking a conscious, environmentally conscious approach to things, but also people's lack of income means that they can't afford public transport fares and petrol, etc. So for all of those reasons, cycling is increasing in our city. So we know that some of our existing cycling paths are becoming overcrowded. They're like the traffic jams on CityLink, but with bikes instead. So I think this is sort of like a red herring to say it's either or. I think we need both done at the same time I think everyone's got to be catered for. And I think if we just ram through a half-thought through option because not level crossing authority, PTV is behind. They are well behind because they haven't put the resources into creating these accessible stops. But I think they should be increasing the resources to installing accessible stops, but with proper consultation to make sure they're the appropriate accessible stops. So I support the motion.
Okay, do I have any other speakers against the motion? Councillor Carly Hannon.
I rise to speak against. I will be actually supporting the motion because I believe it's more important that we come away with a solution tonight. But I would like to rise to criticise, firstly, the delay in getting this done, and to say that I would have been more supportive of the foreshadowed motion. My main concerns are really that the shimmy is where cyclists should go. Similar to Sydney Road, cyclists should not really be on Nicholson Street. It's not going to make sense as a cycling route because the minute you get outside of Brunswick, where all the other super stops are going to be, already this is not going to be a whole of line solution, which is what we always talk about, actually having, proper solutions that can be used by all residents. The other thing is, similar to what Councillor Tappenell said, I think the most important thing is that we do have these accessible stops and that we recognise that you can't put everything at once onto one spot. So if you actually look at the solution that we've come up with, really it's not allowing the important access that we need for cars on Nicholson Street. Now, I understand this is a council who believes that no one needs to drive ever, but actually there are times when people do need to use their cars, and Nicholson Street is the only road that they can use to actually get into the city that wouldn't take them 3 hours.
Thank you, Councillor. Do you have any councillors in favour of the motion that haven't spoken yet? Yes.
Yes. This intrigues me. The proposal for this particular tram stop on the 96th route on Nicholson Street was rejected by all but 2 of the councillors, and on the same night, unanimously, another accessible tram stop was rejected a matter of blocks away. There's been no calls about what political denomination rejected that particular tram stop, which was restricting another accessible stop from being built. I am completely in awe at the amount of work that council officers in this place, community members, including yourself, Brian, and Councillor Martin have put into this work in the last month to get this thing right. And the reason that I wanted it to be put is because it is pure politics. It is pure politics. And we're in an election cycle, so it's inevitable, and it's a part of being on a council like this one, which I can live with. But I will absolutely be supporting this motion because I respect the work that has been done, and I think it is a suitable outcome for everybody who is entitled and does require space on that fairly small road.
Thank you. Any councillors against the motion that haven't spoken? I'll then allow the mover to close the debate if you wish to do so.
Thanks very much.
Remember, you only have 2 minutes and to direct it to the actual...
Yes, I will. Thank you for reminding me,
Yes.
Mayor. So I just would really like to emphasise to the council and to the gallery, this isn't about closing down roads. What we're doing here is we're not shutting down access on Nicholson. Cars will still be able to access it, but we're talking about the fact that council currently has a draft integrated transport strategy where we are actively looking to prioritise public and active transport. And unfortunately, the original designs that were put forward do not prioritise that. And I do agree that we have been let down. We have been let down by our state government. We have a 90% target, of which we have 4 out of our 65 stops that are fully accessible. It is completely unacceptable. Members of our community have been telling us for many, many years that these are important and that these things need to roll out. And really, it is completely and utterly just ridiculous that we are not looking at a proposal to roll these out up and down Sydney Road, Lygon Street, Melville, Nicholson. We want these stops. We want them here in Moreland, and we will continue to advocate for them, regardless of whether or not the state government is wanting to come to the table and actually support our community to roll these out. So I also think it's incredibly irresponsible to book trades before the contract has been signed, and I don't understand that rationale at all. But I really do encourage my fellow councillors to support this motion because it is a way forward, and it is something that aligns with what this council is trying to achieve.
Thank you, councillor. That closes the debate, so I'll put the substantive motion to the vote. All those in favour? Against? Declare that carried.
Can we please have a division?
Been called for a division, so I ask those councillors that voted in favour to raise their hands again, please. So I'll read that across from Yildiz, to Riley, to Martin, to Kavanagh, Abood, Dorney, Davidson, Carly Hannon and Bolton. And those who are against, could you raise your hand, please? So we have Tapanos and Farnley. Thank you, councillors.
Mr.
Going to
Mayor,
go.
can I request that my foreshadowed also make it into the minutes for clarity of the discussion in the chamber?
Is that correct? It's my call, is it? No, I'm not going to allow it because otherwise I think that's a habit that I think, you know, if the other one wasn't successful, I would have allowed, it would have been debated, but it was already successful. So no, I'm not going to. Apparently it's my call. Okay, we're going to go back now to the agenda items and we're going to go to EMOD 518. Council managed community venues policy release for community consultation. Councillor Abood?
Yes, I'd like to propose that the officer recommendation be put.
Okay, that's Councillor Abood moving the officer recommendation. Do I have a seconder for the officer recommendation? Yep, Councillor Dorney. Councillor Abood, would you like to speak to it?
Yeah, I just wanted to acknowledge the huge amount of work that's gone into this draft, not the last motion I spoke to, which isn't a draft, it was being adopted. Sorry about the mistake there. Because I was thinking about the fact that this is a draft and how valuable I think it is that officer time is provided to take us through this work, including the workshop and the several briefings afterwards, and acknowledge that this is a draft and it will be going out for community consultation for last minute changes, which I'm sure can happen. The council manages a huge raft of very diverse spaces that are available for hire for various community groups across the city, and I think that it's a great privilege and a pleasure to be able to do so, and I think that we all can acknowledge that there was a little bit of work to be done about the way we hire out those spaces, so I look forward to hearing, especially now that we're about to also talk about a new way to consult with the public, what people think about this draft and then adopting that later on in the piece.
Thank you, Councillor Abood. Councillor Dorney, you would like to speak to it?
Just really briefly, I don't want to repeat anything, but I think, really looking forward to hearing what the community has to say on this draft. I think that, it's well timed for a review of this policy, and really I'm interested in the equity of access of our community spaces and places that we hire out. So, yeah, looking forward to hear what the community has to say.
Okay. Are there any other? Yes, Councillor.
I've got a
Bolton.
couple of very small amendments.
Okay, would you like to? We'll deal with
Okay.
each one at a time and see if it's acceptable to
Yeah.
the mover and seconder.
So the first one, I just made a slight change to what I sent around prior to the council meeting. So the first one is to modify the first sentence in 4.4 on eligibility criteria.
Yes.
To read, or the last part of the sentence would read, and encouraging all such organisations to be listed in the Moreland Community Directory.
Okay. So just wait till that gets written. Okay.
And
Yes. All right. Do you want to do these all together?
I'll do this. I'll read them all out first.
Okay.
And to amend the fourth dot point under eligibility criteria to add the words "or other recent meeting," so it would read that that groups will provide minutes of their most recent AGM or other recent meeting.
Right.
And the last one is amend section 4.14 around bookings cancellations, so that groups with venue bookings only incur 50% hall hire fee if they cancel within a week of the event.
Okay, all right. So you're moving them as a group.
Yeah.
Are they acceptable to the mover and seconder?
No.
No. Okay. Do we have a seconder for for first of all the 4.4 eligibility criteria? Is any councillor willing to second that? Okay, so that lapses for want of a seconder. I'll go to the next point and see if anyone amend the fourth dot point by adding the words "or any other recent meeting." Is any councillor willing to second that? No, that lapses for want of a seconder. 4.14, cancellation booking changes. Amend so that groups with venue bookings only occur a 50% hall hire fee if they cancel within a week of an event. Is any councillor willing to second that?
Yeah, I think.
Okay, right, so that we'll debate that part of it. The other two parts are lost for want of a seconder, so we're only looking at amending the draft policy by 4.14, cancellation booking changes. Would you like to speak to that change, Councillor Bolton? Yeah.
I'll speak to this one, and obviously there'll be community consultation, but I thought it would be worthwhile putting it up now.
Right. I didn't realise that was a change as well. I'm sorry. Yes. Okay. Please. Yeah. Okay. We'll just deal with 4.14 at the moment.
4.4. So in speaking to the general motion, I can explain why I moved the other things.
Just to clarify, 4.4 is no longer. We're doing 4.14.
Yeah, that's right. So it's the cancellation booking charges. I feel I can certainly understand why it has been put into the draft policy that if groups, cancel their bookings, there'll be some sort of financial penalty. Because obviously we don't want to deny other groups access to bookings because groups fail to notify us well enough in advance. But I feel that asking groups, including very small community groups, to pay 50% of hall hire fee unless they've notified us that they have cancelled their booking 4 weeks prior to an event, I think it would be very onerous. And one example I can think of, some migrant or other international solidarity organisations that have organised for an international guest speaker to come from overseas for a conference or like a special meeting, and then they haven't got their visa despite applying well in advance, or they've got sick or something, and so the event has had to be cancelled with maybe only a week or a few days notice or 2 weeks notice. So I think something like this would be very onerous if it is a small community group that doesn't get government grants or have commercial enterprises, etc., etc. So when I'm looking at this policy, I'm trying to think from the shoes of small community groups or groups that are not resourced. Obviously, there are some groups that book our halls that are have resources, and it probably wouldn't be any skin off their nose. But there are a lot of groups that would struggle to pay 50% of the hall hire fee of Brunswick Town Hall because the guest speaker has cancelled because of, for good reason, ill health or not getting a visa in time, and then they've got to rebook at a later stage, so they've got to pay 50% of the hall hire fee for an event they can't hold, and then they have to do another booking at a future date when the guest speaker becomes available. So I'm thinking of those sorts of scenarios, those unresourced groups.
Okay, thank you. Did you want to speak to it, Councillor Callahan?
So firstly, I'd like to say that it's not ideal to have amendments, particularly financial ones, on the run. However, I do recognise that this is a draft, so we will have the opportunity to look into it further. I do think overall it's a fairly straightforward amendment in that I think that they would only cancel under really quite exceptional circumstances. And as Councillor Bolton has already said, the organisation or community group that has hired the hall may not be in a position to actually pay 100% if they have to cancel last minute.
Okay, any other speakers on this amendment? Okay, I'm going to put the amendment now. All those in favour of the amendment? Against? You're in favour, were you? Okay, declare that carried.
Can I have a division?
Yes, you can have a division. All those who voted in favour of the amendment, could you raise your right hand, please? Right. Councillors Tapanos, Farnley, Kavanagh, Davidson, Carly Hannon. Sorry. Bolton. That's right. And against? Councillors Yildiz, Riley. Hang on. Martin, Abood, and Dorney. Now, before I made an error not realising that point 2 was also what you were also looking for, Councillor Bolton. So, receives a further report with a summary of the consultation and recommendation regarding the final council managed community venues policy. Is that acceptable to the mover and
Oh,
seconder?
that wasn't part of my amendment.
Oh, that wasn't.
That might
Okay.
be Councillor Wood's.
Oh, right. No, it wasn't. Is that part of the
Put
substantive?
the officer recommendation.
Right, okay, good. Sorry, I was just confused there with it on both sides in different colours too. That's fine then. So now we go back to the substantive motion. The substantive motion that was moved by Councillor Abood, seconded by Councillor Dorney, but also including that point that was just successful from Councillor Bolton and Councillor Carly Hannon. I think we'll put it to the vote. All those in favour? Against? Declare that carried. That was unanimous, I think. Right, we'll have it listed as unanimous, please. Okay, we get moved now to DSD 2318, Community Engagement and Public Participation Policy in Moreland, release for community consultation.
Yes. Sorry, I've lost where we're up to.
That's right, we're on
DSD.
page 80 and
Yes,
DSD 2318. Moved by, you're moving the officer recommendation, Councillor Abood?
Let me just catch up.
Yeah, fine, take your time.
No, I'm not. There are a few slight amendments. I just have to find them. I'm a bit rattled.
Just my food, is this it up here?
Out of it's in blue.
The what's
Thank
in
you.
blue, is that what you were after?
Yep, thank you very much.
Okay, so councillors, just to be clear on what's being moved, it's slightly different to the officer recommendation. Okay.
Sorry, could you say that again?
Yeah, so just to be clear to all councillors that Councillor Abood is moving a slight amendment to the officer recommendation, and that is on our screens now. Just take a moment. No, I don't think they're minor changes generally, are they? Yeah. All right, could I have a seconder, please? Yes. Councillor Riley. All right, would you like to speak to a Councillor Abood?
Yes, I would. So there just have been some very minor additions made to the council report, just to finesse some of the detail after the briefing or during the briefing on Monday. This is a very ambitious piece of work that I think will really change the way we do business here at the council. I think it'll make the way we communicate with the community much more transparent. And my second cousin, Carolyn Hall, has just sent me a message telling me that Moreland City Council has just been listed as the most unpopular council in terms of complaints. Well, I would like to say that part of that, the reason for that being the case is because people engage with us. And so I'm looking forward to us, as a result of, a few councillors, quite a lot of community members and a lot of officers from this place putting in many, many hours of work at meetings to work out the best way for us to talk to each other, but also to hear each other and then how to respond. So we really need to close the loop about the way we identify what we're going to do, ask for input into the decision that we've made and people's changes that they might make, and then explain again which of that advice we're going to take on board and which of it we're not. That stuff's already tapped in terms of the Moreland Integrated Transport Strategy, where we've had hundreds and hundreds of submissions made, and we have hundreds of people who want to speak to those submissions. And I think that part of that is showing us that people do want to engage with us, and what we need to get better at, and this work intends to do that, is become better at managing people's expectations and responding to what we hear, and then bringing what we hear into the work that we're doing so that we can have a higher success rate about what we do. There's such value in the community in terms of, people who know things about the way the city functions, and each of us have good relationships with different cohorts of people and the things that they do, as do councillor officers in this place. So I think that once we can really finesse those relationships, we stand to have a great time. I think that this is going to spill over into every different area of council business and just make communications from the inside to the outside much more successful. So I commend this work.
Thank you, Councillor. I'm sure we'll become instantly more popular with the changeover of the Mayor in October 29th. Councillor Riley.
Thank you. I just want to commend all of the people involved, the community members of the committee, that the working group, the councillors, and all the staff that have get us to this point. My question, I guess the sort of driving principle for me is how do we cost or value the extra time and the effort that is necessary to deliver improved culture of engaging and participation? And I just don't think you can. But by not valuing it and actually giving it the recognition that it deserves, we end up all being poorer for it. So I only think this can add to the culture of the city of Moreland. It's something we've been crying out for, at least I know many people I've worked with have been crying out with for a long time, and I think this is going to go a long way to actually improving our engagement, and I think eventually the complaints will start to drop off. I'm certainly hoping that'll be one of the results. So this is really, for me, is really based in really good community development principles. I think it's going to actually address some of the problems we have with democracy at the moment, where people don't feel like they are able to participate effectively. There's a lack of goodwill. There's a lot of frustration on many people's parts, and I think that by entering into a process that involves really thorough processes and principles, we should actually be able to overcome some of that and actually start to see more people stepping up to the plate. I'd like to see more people standing up for public office and taking on the job, because it does involve a lot of work, a lot of commitment, and listening to people's problems and concerns. And I think that without that, democracy is the poorer for it. So I'm hoping this will really underpin the work we do and help us in the future. I also think it is incumbent on us as officers and workers and councillors to really be clear about the parameters of the kinds of things that we are putting up for debate and for discussion and proposal. I went to a recent community meeting on the street where people were wanting to come up with a whole new solution, and unfortunately you can't just go back to a blank slate and come up with all new solutions in every case, because sometimes Victorian laws prohibit you from doing it. And it's just silly and frustrating to even suggest that you should try and do that, because you're doing a disservice to the community and to the people. If anything, they need to go back and lobby their state MPs and change the Victorian law if that's what you want to do. But we need to work within those constraints, and it's really important that we explain that, and I think this policy and the plan that we got before us is going to do that. So I look forward to the next iteration of it. I think it's going to effectively strengthen our advocacy role as a council as well, because we'll have far more people with us as we do that.
Okay, are there any speakers against?
I've got an amendment.
Yes, right.
In section 4.6.4, add an extra dot point, inform community members who've made submissions a week in advance of the final council report and make them aware of how to access the report.
Yeah. So point B.
It's the section titled responsive.
So
Yeah.
just through
Yeah, just trying to.
just through the mayor. So point B is the inclusion from Councillor Bolton.
Yeah, there is it.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Right. I wasn't sure.
It's already in there.
I think it's already in there.
And
already
so
there.
Councillor Abu.
No, I couldn't see it anywhere in the.
It's an
document.
amendment from Councillor Wood.
I looked through looking for it.
It's
So I don't see.
So just-
Can't quite work out what's. Yeah.
Yep, I can tell you exactly what's happened. So just through the Mayor, that point has actually been moved by Councillor Abood because
Oh, it wasn't
she
in
moved
what was
all the
sent
points on
around.
the screen,
Okay.
and that included
Yeah.
your point.
Yeah. Okay.
Oh,
So it's
okay.
already in the.
It wasn't in what was circulated in advance, so.
Yeah, she read off the screen. Yes. All right. Okay. So it's already there. Okay. So there's no amendment. Any speakers against? Okay. So I'm going to put it to the vote. All those in favour? Against? Declare that carried. Okay. We move to DSD 2418, Municipal Public Health and Wellbeing Plan, 2017 to 2021, Year 1 Annual Review. Do I have a mover for this report? Councillor Dorney, have a seconder? Councillor Tapanos. Would you like to speak to it, Councillor Dorney?
Yes, I would. I mean, it's pretty straightforward. I think officers have given a good update on some of the things that they've been achieved in the municipal health and wellbeing, public health and wellbeing plan the previous year through the CAP items, and just looking at upon reflection of what we're achieving with the public health and wellbeing plan, just making some new changes just in line with looking at making sure nutritious food and water is socially and economically accessible to everyone in the community, and residents are eating nutritious foods and choosing water as their main drink of choice, which is something that we know we need to focus on and has come up in previous discussions at council. And also looking at installing more drinking water fountains, which align with many of our other health policies as well, particularly the Cooling Communities one, which was just endorsed earlier. Looking at, so we've got new child safe standards that have been rolled out across the state, so it's just making sure in line with those and ensuring that at least 95% of children are immunised, and also looking at our flexible learning opportunities in the municipality through libraries, art facilities, neighbourhood houses, learning centres, early years, youth services, aquatic and leisure facilities. So,
Thank you very much, Councillor Dorney. Councillor Tapanos, would you like to speak to it?
Very briefly, because I think Councillor Dorney did a great job in summarising it, but I do think that this is one of the most critical sort of health and wellbeing strategies and reports that we've undertaken, and it's great to see that it's been reviewed and additional things have been added. I'm just going to comment on just one. I do remember a couple of years ago that Brunswick in particular had one of the lowest rates of immunisation of children. So I do think that those numbers are starting to change and pick up. So I'm glad to see that that target is in the public health and wellbeing plan, and I look forward to that sort of being a big focus area going forward. But just to thank also all the staff who've worked on this. I know sometimes some of the biggest strategies and the most important ones go through this chamber without a lot of debate, and that's great because we all agree on them. But this one has had a significant amount of work, so well done to everyone involved.
Thanks very much indeed. Councillor Tapanos, would you like to speak to it? Yes.
Yes, I'd like to make a small amendment to outcome 4.7 of priority 7 under outcome 4, and the point reads: currently, council will prepare council staff and the community to respond to future emergencies and disasters within the municipality. I would like to add the words after emergencies and disasters, including extreme heat within the municipality.
All right. Okay. So the mover of the item was Councillor Dorney. Was that acceptable to you, Councillor Dorney?
it's a new.
It's including the words including explain heat. Is that correct?
Considering extreme heat as an emergency.
Can I receive some
Okay.
advice?
The director is. Do it.
Just through the Mayor, and we can refer to the Director for more detail. I'd circulated some comments earlier. It is difficult to give you really comprehensive advice on what this means, what the impact is, because in truth we need more time to understand that. My suggestion has been, because it will require staff and community a range of actions, there will be some impact. I just can't give you much more advice. You know, we would need more time to scope that to give you that definitive advice.
References one thing.
You may.
I just, a few years ago in this chamber, I moved and the council passed, I think it might have been early 2014, a motion recognising that extreme heat waves were an emergency and that we should call on the state government to consider heat waves to be extreme, like an emergency, in order to release funds for emergency relief centres if needed. And so that's sort of that's why I felt that this was in keeping with that policy, that
All right,
motion.
I'll just get a feedback from the CEO.
Yeah, and so again, I go back to, it's just difficult to give you really good comments because it's hard to be clear about the full scope. It's also true that we do have a heatwave plan. So if your motion is simply saying implement the heatwave plan or the work that we've already got, then there's very minimal impact. If there's more work, then that's what I'm struggling, or what officers will struggle to give you advice on tonight.
Okay, so I think I'll ask if it is accepted now by the mover and the seconder. Is it accepted by you, Councillor Dorney?
So should we add climate emergency as well to that also?
Hang on, can we first of all
If we-
accept whether this is acceptable or not? Okay, we need to work out whether can we have a look at it again, please? It's gone off the screen. Yep. Okay. So once again, is this one, extreme heat, acceptable to the mover and the seconder? Hang on. Yeah.
Acceptable for me.
It's acceptable
Yep,
to you?
from my perspective.
Right. It's a seconder accepted. Does the mover accept it?
I understand where Sue's coming from. I'm just wondering about the implications.
Hang on. It's up to, so I probably just need a yes or a no. I know it's a bit.
Yes.
Yeah, okay, so it becomes part of the substantive motion. Okay, so that becomes now part of the substantive motion. Now, are there any other amendments? Yes. Yeah.
I'd just like to make a suggestion of that amendment that was just made, that we replace extreme heat with the climate emergency.
And replace it. Right.
Don't you just add it?
Oh, I'm happy to add it
I think
if
add
they
it.
prefer
I think
that.
add it.
Yeah, okay. Okay. Right, so that's moving an amendment, Councillor Martin. There's a seconder to that amendment? Other than
It's
the
acceptable, I think.
Sorry?
It's
That's
unacceptable.
acceptable?
Oh,
Sorry, it's acceptable to you? And it's acceptable to you?
Yeah.
Okay, so it becomes a substantive motion. Not great practice to do this on the run, but anyway. Right, okay. Any other discussion on this matter? You may about the substantive motion, yes?
Yeah, there are many parts to the municipal health and wellbeing plan, and many very good parts of this report, which I support. I just want to say a few words about my addition of the words extreme heat, and why I didn't only say climate emergency, which is something which we have acknowledged in this council before. But I think we have emergency responses to floods and fire. But when I moved this motion in council in 2014, it was when we had, I seem to remember it was about a week of plus 40-degree days, and more like almost 2 times or 3 times as many people died in that week from extreme heat as died in the Black Saturday bushfires. So this is a big issue, but it's often an issue that not a lot of people think about. And the reality is, a lot of people, they might not be able to afford cooling in their homes, but even if they can, and there's blackouts like happened during that heat, that extreme heat, then any air conditioning you might have is, not going to work. So, I mean, people die in that sort of heat, but also if it doesn't cool down to, below 30 degrees, then it means that people don't get a good sleep. So there is a need in society to recognise extreme heat as an emergency situation. It's obviously related to climate change, but it's a disaster in and of itself. And the reality is people often say, oh, go to a cool place. But most cool places cost money to go to, which people don't always have, or maybe they can afford to go to a cool place a few times, but not on an ongoing basis. So that's my reason for moving that. And my understanding at the time that I moved that is the state government doesn't consider extreme heat as being a national emergency, therefore doesn't release funding to create heat relief centres and so forth. And at the moment, our libraries are really overcrowded in heat waves because that's the only venue we've got to offer.
Thank you, councillor. Is there any other discussion on this? Just before I put to the vote, can I just clarify you are happy with the words there, councillor Martin?
Yep.
Okay. Okay, we're going to put it to the vote. So the standing motion, all those in favour? Against, declare that carried. Division. Was there, you voted against? All right. All those that voted in favour, could you raise your right hand? Okay. Councillor Yildiz? Tapanos? Riley? Martin Kavanagh? Abood? Dorney? Davidson? Carly Hannon? Bolton? And those against? Councillor Farley. All right, thank you. We move on now to next report is DED 6218, Achieving Zero Carbon in the Planning Scheme, response to notice of motion, non 3318. Are you moving the officer recommendation, Councillor?
No, I'm moving a slight amendment. It's to add a
Okay, would you
point
like to-
3, which is on the screen.
Okay, could you read point 3 for
So
us?
point 3 is, in addition to the officer recommendation, writing to the Council Alliance for Sustainable Built Environments, or CASB, the joint councils and other local governments and stakeholders who were contacted to advise them of the council's decision and next steps in relation to progressing towards a zero carbon planning scheme. Noting that council's decision and next steps will be published on council's website, and specifically sending thanks to the contributors who provided feedback, which assisted in the preparation of this report.
Okay, I'll just check. We have a seconder. All right, Councillor Farley, you can now speak to the motion.
Thanks
Councillor.
very much. So for those that may not be familiar with what this is talking about, essentially in Moreland's planning scheme, we have a provision that mandates all buildings have certain environmental sustainable design elements. You call that an ESD provision. Not many councils have an ESD provision. It's actually not mandated across the state. What this is in response to is myself moving what would be parts of an ESD 2.0 amendment. So that was mandating that 15% of rooftops either have solar or green roofs, that all buildings include space for organics, including multiple chutes for high-rise developments, and also future-proofing installations of electric vehicle chargers. Now, when the notice of motion did go up the first time, we didn't get full support in the chamber, but this report is highlighting the support that we've got from the broader council community, and I'd just like to quickly read out the councils that have expressed support for this motion and working with CASB and Moreland City Council to actually progress further ESD provisions. So that is Strathbogie, Yarra City, Maribyrnong, Melbourne, Brimbank, Yarra Ranges, Port Phillip, Darebin, Monash, Stonington and Kingston. So I would like to express my thanks to all of those councils, councillors, officers who have expressed their support. I think it's really important that we lift the standard of development right across the state, not just focusing on what I raised, but also looking at other things going above and beyond. And also really look forward to working with CASB in particular to really push this forward, as well as advocating to the state government that ESD should be a minimum requirement for all councils right across the country.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Farley, as a seconder, would you like to speak to it?
Thank you, Chair. I think Councillor Martin's highlighted all the main points. I just want to make one additional point, if I may, and it kind of relates to the urban heat island effect. It relates to the next report coming through, which is around medium density. But one of the issues we have in regards to achieving zero carbon emissions and addressing urban heat island effect issues is the fact that a lot of trees in the private realm get destroyed when development happens, especially medium density areas. I know I bought a property in Fawkner. One of my favourite aspects of that property is in the backyard. There's a large lemon tree. There's an olive tree. It was well looked after by an Italian family for 50 years. Now, if that house gets knocked down, you put 3 units on it, guess what happens? Those trees get taken out as well. So it's actually a sad reflection. Now, nowhere in this report is that addressed. It's more around improving the quality of the ESD standards of the actual building. But I know the garden area requirements will address that in some capacity. But the reality is, when you've got in Glenroy, when there are unit developments taking place, and 80% of those, over 80% of those unit applications are for 3 or more units, there is a substantial amount of trees in the private realm being destroyed. So it would be nice to get a bit more recognition on that, and that the damage that medium density and cramming as many units in the area is doing to urban heat island effect and doing to the carbon emissions. But I will leave that for at a future point. So I just wanted to sort of point that out as part of this.
Thank you, Councillor Farley. Any councillors wish to speak against the motion? I think that I'm going to put it to the vote, actually.
Just two.
Yeah, that's it's at the discretion of the chair. Okay, I'm going to put it to the vote. All those in favour? Against? Declare that carried. Sorry.
Recorded as unanimous?
Yep. Happy to have it recorded. So you've got to get mover or seconder if you want to get him. DED 6318, medium density housing review in response to notice of motion. Notice of motion 2918. Councillor Martin. Are you moving the officer recommendation, Councillor Martin?
No, I'm not.
Okay. Does anyone ever move their officer recommendation?
We do value the work the officers do.
Yeah. Okay. So maybe if you could read the bits that you're adding to the officer recommendation.
So essentially, I'm just adding some slight amendments to the draft design advice sheets that are attached to this. One is adding in appropriate provisions for green waste in the design sheets. It was only highlighted as landfill and recycling. In there, adding in additional design sheets references to passive design wasn't included in those sheets. And also just emphasising that there are situations where solar panels can be visible, and it is actually appropriate to be facing them in the correct orientation. So we're just highlighting that they can be visible. It's just when you have heritage issues, you need to consider that. And then also adding in a point E down the bottom, which is talking about heavily promoting the new design sheets online, as well as the tree selection tool, which is part of this process. So once it's finalised, we'll be really advocating to have that.
Just got a second now, so you can speak to.
Finish what I was just saying then. So one of the things that we're often criticised, and something that's it's all too common as a councillor is people saying, well, you know, these horrible homes are going up. What are you doing to guide developers, architects, draftspeople as to what you would like to see in the city? And I think these new design sheets that we'll be putting out as part of this process really do highlight what we would like to see and actually highlight best practice for what we want to see roll out across the city. The tree selection tool is another additional feature which will encourage users to be able to select a tree and put it in their property. Just to highlight what the report touches on, and that is that over the next 2 decades, we're expecting another 78,000 residents in our city. And to accommodate those people, we need about another 38,000 dwellings to be built. That is a huge number, and it is so incredibly important that we put all the provisions and all the mechanisms in place now to make sure that this city is well designed and well built. and that 35% of that population will be living in medium density. So it is really important that we conduct this review and that we do this work, looking at things like protecting trees in the private realm, getting better built forms, having greater planning permit compliance, and also advocating to the state government to lift the standards in Res Code are all things included in this, and it's all really vital, important work that we're doing proactively to actually make sure that this city is built well.
Thank you. Seconder, Councillor Farnley, would you like to speak?
Yeah, I would. This response to the notice of motion, I think that's what the report is also a response to my notice of motion, and engage residents to